I did not feel safer right away. I noticed it when I stopped watching everyone around me. That shift happened quietly. No announcement, no single event. In America, scanning your surroundings feels automatic. You check exits, you read body language, you measure distance. It becomes background behavior so constant you stop noticing it. When I arrived in Australia, I carried the same habits. For weeks, nothing changed consciously. Then one day I realized I was standing in public without calculating risk. My body had relaxed before my mind did. The realization came in a cafe where I was sitting with my back to the door, something I would have avoided instinctively before. I was not testing myself or trying to be brave. I had simply sat down without thinking about tactical positioning. That thoughtlessness was the signal. My nervous system had stopped treating public space as potential threat. The shift was physiological before it was cognitive. My shoulders were lower, my breathing was deeper, my jaw was unclenched. These were not choices I made. They were automatic responses to an environment that consistently demonstrated it did not require that level of defensive readiness. The absence of threat became more powerful than any single moment of safety could have been. Absence allowed my body to finally believe what my mind had been trying to tell it. You can relax here. You do not need to monitor everything. You are not responsible for predicting and preventing danger in every moment. That permission changed everything. Safety does not always announce itself. Sometimes it reveals itself through absence. Absence of tension, absence of urgency, absence of defensiveness in small interactions. In Australia, strangers did not carry the same guarded posture I was used to reading. Eye contact felt neutral. Personal space felt respected without being cold. Public disagreements rarely escalated. These were small signals, but they repeated daily. Repetition builds perception. The neutral eye contact was particularly striking because eye contact in America often carries charge. It can signal threat or challenge or unwanted attention. Here, eye contact was just acknowledgement. People looked at each other briefly without it meaning anything beyond recognition of shared space. That neutrality removed a layer of social interpretation I had been performing constantly without realizing it. Personal space norms were clear, but not rigid. People maintained distance without the aggressive protection of boundaries I had seen elsewhere. There was respect without coldness, proximity without invasion. Public disagreements happened, but they rarely escalated into aggression. I watched people navigate conflicts in queues, in traffic, in crowded spaces, and the default response was de-escalation rather than confrontation. Someone would apologize quickly, even when fault was unclear. Someone would yield space without resentment. I did not analyze crime rates or statistics when I moved. The change I felt was behavioral. Drivers did not lean on horns quickly. People waited without visible frustration. Public spaces felt shared instead of contested. That consistency lowered my alertness naturally. It was not about perfection. It was about predictability. Predictability reduces stress more than control does. The traffic behavior was an early indicator. Drivers gave way without aggressive signaling. Horns were used as information rather than punishment. When someone made a mistake, the response was usually patience rather than rage. That patience suggested people were not operating at maximum stress constantly, which meant driving was not triggering fight or flight responses the way it often did elsewhere. Waiting in lines, people stood calmly without pushing forward or checking their phones with visible agitation. The absence of that agitation was noticeable because I was used to public spaces feeling like competitions for time and space. Here, public spaces felt genuinely shared. No one seemed to be fighting for their right to exist in the space. Everyone seemed to assume their presence was legitimate, and so was everyone else's. That assumption removed the constant negotiation of status and territory that exhausts people in other contexts. The predictability mattered more than I initially understood. Even when something unexpected happened, the range of likely responses was narrow and mostly pro-social. That narrow range meant my brain could stop running constant scenario planning about how interactions might go wrong. In the US, vigilance feels responsible. You stay aware because you are told to. In Australia, awareness exists without constant edge. I noticed I stopped positioning myself near exits. I stopped scanning crowds for sudden movements. I stopped rehearsing responses in my head. Those habits faded without effort. That fading signaled something deeper. My nervous system trusted the environment. The vigilance I had practiced was not paranoia. It was appropriate risk management in environments where threat was statistically and experientially real. I had been taught to stay aware as a form of self-care and personal responsibility. The teaching was not wrong for the context it addressed. But in Australia, the same level of vigilance was unnecessary, and my body figured that out before my mind did. I stopped seeking exit routes because I stopped unconsciously expecting the need for rapid escape. I stopped scanning for sudden movements because sudden movements were rare and rarely threatening. I stopped rehearsing verbal responses to potential confrontations because confrontations rarely materialized, and when they did, they de-escalated quickly. These habits faded because they were no longer reinforced by environmental feedback. My nervous system learns through pattern recognition. The interesting part is that most Americans here might not notice this shift immediately. It does not feel dramatic. It feels subtle. You simply feel lighter. Conversations feel less defensive. Public transport feels less tense. You are not constantly evaluating strangers as potential problems. That reduction in background calculation changes how your body moves. The subtlety is exactly why the shift is so profound. If safety came through dramatic rescue or obvious intervention, you would notice it consciously and could dismiss it as exceptional. But safety that comes through consistent absence of threat operates below conscious awareness, which means it changes your baseline state rather than creating memorable peaks of relief. Feeling lighter is not metaphorical. There is actual physical sensation of reduced weight when chronic tension releases from your body. Your shoulders drop, your chest opens, your gait changes. You move through space with less compression and more ease. Conversations require less energy because you are not simultaneously running defensive protocols while engaging. You can listen fully because you are not also monitoring for signs of hostility or judgment. Public transport becomes boring rather than stressful because you are not treating every unknown person as a potential threat requiring assessment. The reduction in background calculation is perhaps the most significant change because that calculation was consuming enormous cognitive and emotional resources without me realizing it. When those resources are freed, they become available for other things. Creativity, presence, reflection, connection. The body moves differently because it is not perpetually braced. That change in movement changes how others perceive you, which changes how they interact with you, which reinforces the safety further. It becomes a positive feedback loop. Safety is often defined by rules and enforcement. What I experienced was social safety. Norms that discourage escalation. Expectations of cooperation. A general tone of patience in daily life. Those norms do not remove risk entirely, but they reduce emotional friction. That friction matters more than headlines. The distinction between legal safety and social safety is critical. Legal safety comes from effective law enforcement and low crime rates. Social safety comes from shared norms about how people treat each other in ordinary interactions. Both matter, but social safety affects daily experience more directly because you interact with social norms constantly while you rarely interact with law enforcement. The norms here discouraged escalation in ways that were taught through modeling rather than through explicit rules. People saw others de-escalate, so they de-escalated. People experienced cooperation, so they cooperated. The expectations were maintained through social feedback rather than punishment. The general tone of patience meant that mistakes and delays were treated as normal rather than as offenses. That tolerance reduced the emotional stakes of ordinary activities. You could make a mistake without feeling like you had violated social contract. You could move slowly without feeling like you were stealing other people's time. That reduced friction meant daily life required less emotional management. You were not constantly smoothing over rough interactions or recovering from hostile exchanges. The steadiness of that low-friction existence created a foundation of safety that mattered more than any dramatic measure of security could. I did not wake up one morning thinking Australia is safer. I realized it weeks later when I caught myself standing still without scanning the room. That moment felt small, but it explained everything. Safety became invisible because it became normal. And once your body learns that normal, you understand how much energy vigilance used to cost you. The delayed realization was important because it proved the change was real rather than wishful thinking. I had not been trying to feel safer or looking for evidence of safety. The shift happened organically through accumulated experience. Standing still without scanning was such an ordinary action that its significance only became clear when I remembered how recently that would have been impossible for me. I would have positioned myself strategically, monitored the room periodically, stayed partially alert even while appearing relaxed. That constant partial activation was exhausting in ways I only recognized after it stopped. Safety becoming invisible through normalization is the highest form of safety because it means you are not spending energy maintaining it or proving it or defending it. It simply is. Your body accepts it as baseline, which frees all the resources that were previously dedicated to vigilance. Those resources are substantial. Vigilance requires attention, physical tension, emotional readiness, and cognitive processing. When all of that is released, you feel fundamentally different. Not just relieved, but changed. Your capacity expands. Your presence deepens. Your interactions become more genuine because you are not splitting your attention between engagement and threat assessment. Understanding how much energy vigilance costs only becomes possible after you have lived without it for long enough that your body recalibrates to a lower baseline. That recalibration is the gift of sustained safety. It teaches you what normal can feel like when normal does not require armor.